So in this video, I'm going to continue this miles and kilometers conversion program. I'm going to write the code for the convert button. So what we want to do is check to make sure that the user types in a valid number in the distance box, and then we're going to make sure that they select from the from list and that they select from the to list. And after that, then we're going to convert from kilometers to kilometers or miles. What we're going to do is if that the user selects kilometers to kilometers, we're going to ask the user to select two different items, or they select miles to miles. So I'm going to double click the convert button. So first thing, I need a few variables. So I am going to need a variable called distance and another variable called converted distance. The next thing I'm going to use my if, and since I'm dealing with double, if double dot, I'm going to try to parse, and what I'm going to try to parse is the text of this text box, which is called txt distance. So I'm going to try to convert that and assign that value to distance. So to do that, I type in txt distance dot text, comma. Now the target is going to be an out parameter, which means that distance doesn't have to have a value assigned to it. So at this point, distance has no value. So I'm going to say distance. Now since I put this in an if, so what's going to happen is that if this is true, if the parsing is done, then this is going to return a true. If for some reason it cannot parse the text of txt distance because it's either empty or I type in a letter, then it's going to return a false. So with that, I'm going to if the parsing is successful, I'm going to do something, right? If this is successful, I'm going to do something. If not, I want to let the user know that the parsing wasn't successful with a message box. So I'm going to handle the false part first, and then I'll do the true part. So notice how I've structured this. So this is my if statement. If it's true, I'm going to continue. If not, I'm going to let the user know that what's in the box is not convertible. Okay. So I will do a message box dot show, and I'll say, please enter a number in distance or for distance. Okay, so at least that'll hint that they need to enter a number. So then continuing my if statement, the next thing I want to make sure is that they select an item from the from box. So I'm going to say if, now remember it's called lst from, if lst from dot selected index is not equal to -1. Now the index of these items, like kilometer and miles, kilometers is going to be index 0 because we start counting at 0, and miles is going to be 1. If the user does not select anything from the list box, the index is 0. So this, excuse me, the selected index is -1. So what I'm making sure is that if the selected index is not equal to -1, that means that the user has selected something. If it's -1, then we know that the user did not select any of the items that's in the from list. Okay. So if the user has selected something, we're going to do something, right? That's the true part. I'm going to leave that. And then I'm going to let the user know that they need to select something. So I'm going to have the else part. And I'm going to let the user know that they need to select an item from the. So I'm going to display a message box dot show must select item from. So I must select item from, so that to let them know. Okay. So if they selected from the from box, then I'm going to make sure that they have selected something from the to box. So I'm going to say if lst2 dot selected index is not equal to -1, so when you're doing nested if statements like I'm doing, it's better to do them one at a time. So you notice I'm doing them one at a time. I'm not trying to write this code sequentially like that because that gets very confusing. And I'm moving from the outside to the inside. So that's how you want to do your nested if statements. Don't try to write this code straight like this because you'll get all confused and you'll have mismatched curly braces, and you'll have mismatched logic. So this is the way you want to do it. So if this is true, so that means that they selected something from the from box and something from the, okay, well, first I'm going to handle the false part, right? So right here, I press enter, else. So I'm going to have a message box dot show must select item 2. Okay, so now that we can go back and handle it. So there's going to be 4 different situations. There's going to be that they select kilometers and kilometers, kilometers and miles, miles, kilometers, and miles, miles. So that's basically 4 if statements. Now for your homework, you're going to have at least 6 if statements because you're dealing with 3 items instead of the 2 that I'm doing right here. Okay, so let's see. So if lst from dot selected index is equal to 0, meaning that they selected kilometers. And I'm going to use my AND operator here, which is ampersand, ampersand, and lst2 dot selected index equals 0, meaning that they selected kilometers and kilometers. So we want to tell them that they need to select 2 different items. So I'm going to say message box dot show say must select different distance units. Okay, must select different. There's different ways you can handle if they select kilometers and kilometers. You can just say that 12 kilometers is 12 kilometers, or you can let them know that you want them to select different units. So there's different ways you can handle that. There's no absolute right way you have to do it. That's the nice thing about programming, is that there is flexibility There's not one absolute right way to do things. You just have to be logical about what you do. Okay, so that's the first if statement. Then I'm not going to do a nested if. This is a sequential if now. So this is one if statement. So it's checking to see if 0 and 0. The next one, and I'll just do a copy and paste and then just change it. So, but you got to be careful when you do copy and paste. Make sure you know what you're doing. Okay. So I'm going to copy this. Control B, and then I'm going to select the second one. Okay, so they select the kilometers from the from, and they selected miles from the one. So the first thing we need to do is we need to convert. So I'm going to say converted distance is going to be equal to, now the way you convert kilometers to miles is that you multiply by 0.62. So I know that that's a rough number. So I know that 10 kilometers is equal to 6.2 miles. Okay, so I'm going to multiply distance, because I know what that is, times 0.62. So converted distance is going to give me, so I want the converted distance, which is going to be from kilometers to miles. So I know that that's roughly multiplied by 6.2. Okay, so then we got two more to do, two more if statements to do. So let me, okay. All right, so I'm going to copy this line right here. And you just got to be careful what you got to make sure you know what you're converting. So the third scenario is that they select miles from the from and kilometers from the to. So if that is the case, so to convert from miles to kilometers, you multiply the distance. Now 1 mile is going to be equal to 1.609 kilometers. So that's how you convert. Oh, I forgot to display it in the label. Let me go back to the previous one. So I'm going to say that LBL converted distance dot text. Remember, we got to convert the text, right? So I'm going to say is equal to converted distance dot to string, semicolon. Okay. So in this case, it's going to be I can reuse this thing because that's what I want to do. Control C, Control V. There we go. Okay. So I just got one last scenario to do, and that is when the user selects miles and miles. So I'm just going to copy this one, and all I have to do is change the 1 and the 1. So copy, so Control V. So I'm just going to say, oops, 1 and 1 here. And now I'm ready to test my program. So I'll click the start button right here. First thing I want to make sure that it doesn't crash. So I'm going to click the convert. I see it says please enter number for the distance. So I know that 10 kilometers is equal to 6.2 miles. So I'll say 10. If I well, oops, I selected kilometers. So anyway, it's going to say must select item 2, which I didn't do. So kilometers to kilometers. Must select different distance units, okay. Kilometers to miles, I know that 10 kilometers is equal to 6.2 miles, and there we go. If I say miles to miles, remember, miles select different distance units, okay. So miles to kilometers, let me change this to, now, there's a little rounding error here, but we know that 6.2 miles is roughly 10 kilometers, right? So we can convert it, and we got a little rounding error, but that's good. That's not too bad, because it's something like 6.218 or 6.217, but you know, for our purposes, that's good enough. So we see that this works. So this is all the skills you need to do homework number 3. In this video, I am going to show you how to make an application that lets the user convert distances to miles or kilometers. Our application will have a label, a text box, another label, a list box, a label, and a convert button. I'm going to do this video in 2 parts because it's going to be a little long. So first thing is we have to create a new project. I'm going to name my new project Miles and Kilometer Conversion. Miles and Kilometers Conversion. And click OK. As soon as the form pops up, I'm going to start typing the title bar. Press enter and it appears on the title bar. I'm going to make the screen, the form a little wider so that you can see the title. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add a label. Move the label to about that position. I'm gonna resize the label, or resize the text. So I'm gonna change the font, make it about an 11, and click OK. And then for the text of my label, I'm going to say distance and a colon. Now I'm going to add a text box. Press enter. I'm going to place the text box over to the right. I'm going to name my text box txt distance. I'm going to add another label. That's not a label. Since I'm going to be using a list box, and list box doesn't have a place for a title, I'm going to use a label to title my list box. So I'm going to change the font of my label. I'll make it an 11. And I'm going to change the text of my list box. My label. And type in from colon. I'm now going to add a list box to my form. Okay, so there's my list box. Move a little. Okay. I am going to name this list box LST from with a capital F because I use camel notation. LST from. I'm gonna add 2 items to my list box, so I scroll down in the properties and I find the items property, and you'll see that it says collection, and you're gonna click on this ... or the ellipsis button, and here I'm gonna type just two items. So kilometers, and I'm doing it in alphabetical order, kilometers, press enter, and miles. And then click OK. Now I'm going to resize my list box so that it only displays kilometer and miles. Otherwise it would display that empty space, and I don't want it to do that. So now I'm going to create my to label and my list box 2. So first I'm going to create my label. I'm going to change the size of my font, 11. I'm going to change the text to say 2 colon. And then I'm going to add my list box. Move it just below the, and like the other list box, I am going, well, first of all, I'm going to rename this list box LST2. LST2. I'm going to add kilometers and miles as items to my list box. I'm going to scroll down and find items. Then I type in kilometers and miles and click OK. And I want to resize it because I don't want it to have all this empty space, so I'm going to resize my list box. Now I'm going to add another label to my form. I'm going to change the font of my label here. I've been making them all 11. I'm going to change the text, and I am going to call this converted. The text is going to be converted distance. I'm going to add another label to my form, but this one is going to be to display the converted distance. So because of that, I am going to change the properties so that by default a list box, a label doesn't have any borders. So we're going to change the properties of this label so that it does have a border, so that you can see it displayed with a border when you convert the distances. Now, because I am going to use this label to display the converted distance, I'm going to rename this label. Normally, I don't rename labels unless I'm going to change their text in the execution of the program. So I did not rename distance or the from or the to label. They're like label 1, label 2, and label 3, and label 4 for converted distance. Now this one is label 5, but I'm going to change it because I am going to display the result. So right up here where it says name, I am going to change it to LBL converted distance. I'm using camel notation. So LBL converted distance, and then I'm going to change the auto size property. The auto size property is going to be false. I'm going to change the border style to fixed single. I'm going to delete the text, which is label 5, so there's nothing there. And I'm going to change the text alignment to middle center. And there is my new label with all those properties that I specified. Okay, I'm going to add my convert button. So I'm going to rename this button. I'm going to call it BTN convert. I'm going to change the text of the button to convert. So in the next video, I will show you the code for the convert button.